Okay, so now the session is, the recording has started. Hello friends, we are happy to welcome you all to this webinar, which is being organized under the Asia Pacific Online Distance Education, in short APODE, which is being celebrated from 1st of November till 5th of November, and which is being collaboratively hosted by the Open and Distance Learning Association of Australia, the very famous, very reputed ODLA, and the Flexible Learning Association of New Zealand, another very important association body for the promotion of flexible learning, and the Asian Society for Open and Distance Education, APODE, which is the publisher of the Asian Journal of Distance Education. So APODE is the partner to this venture. Now, a little brief for our friends about these partners. ODLA is a non-profit organization, and it is a professional association of educators, instructional designers, educational researchers, educational consultants, and administrators, etc., from Australia and overseas, and which is dedicated to the advancement of research, practice, and support of education across time and space. ODLA connects professionals in order to share experiences and disseminate information with respect to open and distance learning. So its members come from all educational sectors, plus including commercial training providers and training units in the corporate sector. They are involved in management, administration, design, development, research, and teaching in multiple modes that may best be described as outside the traditional classroom. The FLANGE, the Flexible Learning Association of New Zealand, is equally dedicated to enhance flexible learning practices across all sectors of education in New Zealand, and they advance current thinking and contribute to advance the current thinking and contribute to the research and scholarship in the field of open, distance, and flexible learning. It provides the distance and flexible learning community with a wide range of opportunities for professional learning, professional development in open, flexible, and distance learning, including online and e-learning. As we all are aware, in the year 2020, the COVID crisis put the spotlight on the value of investing in new flexible modes of education. And this exciting initiative, this APODE week, aims to both celebrate and build further capacity in online distance education in the Asia Pacific region. And that's why a series of freely available webinars have been made available during this week from leading practitioners and international educators working in the area. And that's why it is an excellent opportunity to critically reflect on the COVID experiences over the past means more than 1.5 years with global community of educators. And as we consider the role of new models of online distance education in the future. On 1st November, when this series was started, Trish Chaplin-Cheney, who is the ICDE ambassador for Oceania, outlined the UNESCO OER recommendations and also those recommendations that spotlight equity and inclusion factors across all educational sectors. So that was the first in this series. Then yesterday, the 2nd November, Professor George Wiltshire, Dr. Ellen Bernay, and Dr. Melissa Bond, they discussed lessons that we have learned from learners and other valuable insights into the online learning experience from students' perspectives. Now, today, Dr. Aras Bojkurt and me, we will discuss distance education in the new normal, implications for a post-COVID world. Let me tell a little bit, because he is such a wonderful friend, brother, known dear to all of us. Dr. Aras, he received his MA and PhD degree in distance education from Anadolu University. He is currently working as a specialist at Anadolu University Open Education Facility and has experience in teaching to adult learners and K-12 students. He serves as a reviewer for several journals in distance education field and is also on the editorial board member of e-learning magazine and editorial review board for OLJ, the Open Learning Journal. His current research interests are topics related to digital books, interactive e-books, gamification, game-based learning, research trends in distance education, social networks, online interaction, online learning spaces, online learning communities. So he is also interested in critical theories such as connectivism, rhizomatic learning, pedagogy, emerging research paradigms such as social network analysis, sentiment analysis, and data mining. So I welcome you, Aras. Thank you so much for joining me with this. And just one sentence about me. I'm Ramesh Sharma, and currently I'm working with a public university in New Delhi, India, Ambedkar University, Delhi. Here I am working as associate professor for instructional design. Prior to that, I was teaching in Wawasan Open University, Malaysia, as associate professor of education technology and learning resources. I have around 2 decades of working experience with Indira Gandhi National Open University, which, like Anadolu University, is another mega open university, as Sir John Daniel designated those universities which have over 1 million registrations. And in addition to that, I have a beautiful experience. I still consider as one of the most beautiful countries in the world, as director of distance education in Guyana, which is in South America. So as the CFTC expert of Commonwealth Secretariat from there. With this brief introduction about this webinar series and what we are going. So we have thought that first I'll make my presentation, and after that Dr. Aras will begin. So please allow me to share my screen. Okay, so here, as I told you that we are today discussing about distance education in the new normal, and our focus would be on achieving intellectual renaissance. Now, this coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic, it was unexpected, unpredicted, and hit the entire globe when we were not ready. We never thought that it may happen. Although I'm reminded of a book, actually it was circulated on social media, that some author, I forgot the name of that novel. He had predicted that this kind of situation may come and what may happen, you know, those predictions, forecasts, etc. The nations which were once in a race for prosperity, they suddenly entered a race for survival. And it caused a rupture in the most glorious days of human history. This pandemic called attention to our incompetencies when we humans considered us to be the most superior. Sir Anthony Sheldon, he originally wrote the Fourth Education Revolution to critical acclaim in 2018, which focused on the impact of artificial intelligence and how a transition from the current factory model of education to a technology enhanced personalized education 4.0 could permanently change the role of teachers and democratize the learning process. The prevailing model of education is very old and does not adequate meet the needs of the future. In fact, Sir Anthony Sheldon, in his book, The Fourth Education Revolution, states that there have been only three education revolutions in the last 3 to 5 million years. And the third education revolution happened about 400 years ago with the arrival of the printing press. So first education revolution was organized learning as the necessary education. Second education revolution was the coming of schools and universities, that is as institutionalized education. And the third education revolution was printing and secularization, education for the masses. Fourth education revolution he considered as the artificial intelligence applications. Then after that, he brought out this COVID edition, the new book, which goes further to examine the impact of the global pandemic on education. And it assesses the latest advances in education technology and the current debate among thought leaders in the world. So in our reference, we identified that there are three waves of pandemic pedagogy. So, and if we conceptualize it within the scope of COVID-19, the development chronologically, the first wave as the face-to-face education began thousands of years ago and involves a learner gathering together in the same place, same time to receive education. This mode of education has been the gold standard of education as it allows for eye contact between teachers and students. The second wave, screen-to-screen education, emerged from the development of information and communication technologies in the new millennium. And upon the advent of computers and online network technologies, teaching and learning on digital screens were largely adopted across the globe. And the third wave, currently the mask-to-mask education, has been implemented in response to the pandemic. These masks worn to protect against the pandemic are now part of the new normal and have been accepted on account of maintaining the so-called gold standard of eye contact. These waves, in fact, demonstrate that the delivery modes of education are based on, say, false assumptions. For example, learning only occurs when it meets certain conditions, and that vary by local or global realities, and also by the needs of the societies. So these waves further indicate that the context of learning and how we define it matters, as in the case of emergency remote teaching and learning. So this is quite interesting case I want to highlight from within India. The image on the left, which you see in the red multi-story building, is the next building to our in which we live here. And you see that there are some people standing in the balconies. The first floor here, one day when I was walking towards the boundary wall, I heard some loud voices, and I was curious to see that what is happening. And I found that there is a person, he using a megaphone speaking something about mathematics, and that raised my curiosity further, that how come a person is using loudspeaker and telling something about mathematics. And I noted that there are other people who were standing in their balconies and paying attention towards that. And then I came to know that he is the teacher who still taking this opportunity to teach Even they are not the students of his class or school directly, but since they are in the community, in the society there, started teaching mathematics to that. So you can see in the photograph, the kids, means it's not the zoom out version, but I saw that the parents and their kids, they were there and teaching. And the another one is the another example from the state where there was no internet. So the municipal committee, they put the loudspeakers on the electric poles so that the lessons could be, the teacher connecting their mobile phone or speaking through them. So as a matter of that, it forced us to take many measures to protect ourselves from the, the pathogenic effect. And then we had to find certain measures as emergency remote teaching and learning to put into practice so that the continuity of education is ascertained. Now, while these ad hoc arrangements, they were adopted and many best practices they were found, we also found that there were certain issues in which it was thought that what is happening in the classroom, we just put it into the using internet and computers, then that can lead to those same things. But that is not the case. So we need to be well prepared to adopt the new normal. And here the focus should be on humanizing education and guiding the educational practices through care and empathy. This was another thing that the normal, new normal, and next normal, they also came into vogue. And we have often spoken of the new normal, which rather implies an evolving thing rather than to replace the old or something there. And that way it is a quite thing that if we think what was normal, or really is there was anything which was normal in there, because it has created a certain kind of this pandemic as a rupture in that normal, because that previously known normal no longer exists, and the new normal is real and it may be here to stay. And therefore what we need to do is to reconstruct our future on the solid grounds by accepting the reality of this new normal. And in education, this means revisiting how we define the art of teaching and learning, and asking open-ended questions on educational pedagogies, theories, practices, and technologies, etc. Now, I want to take you to now in the South and Latin America, because the kind of experiences which we have gained, it has brought out certain, either the lacuna in our system or certain things which we did not realize. So here, this is a beautiful country, Honduras, which is, and it is also known for floods, storms, hurricanes, etc. And this is Choluteca River, which every year's, it was causing disruptions into the life of the people. So the government there, they decided, I think it was in 1998, they decided to build a bridge over the river so that this part of the country can be connected to the other side there. So a contract was given to the Japanese firm, and the bridge was built. But what happened that I think either during the same year or maybe the next year, there was a very strong, perhaps it was hurricane, and a lot of floods were there. So what happened that the road on the both sides of the bridge, it washed away. And even the river, it changed its course. So you can see in the figure that this is Choluteca River. The bridge is still there, so strongly built. And it creates a a question for us that because normally what we believe is that built to last for a long time. So from there, it makes us to ponder that we should be shifting, moving to the build to adapt to the changing conditions like that. There. This pandemic pedagogy, it also involves more than teaching and learning in the time of crisis. It also deals with how we conceptualize teaching and learning. And based on the views of these learning ecologies, pandemic provide this pedagogy, it provides the opportunity to apply asymmetric designs, that is teaching and learning as an emergent practice based on the needs of the learners, or to pursue pedagogical minimalism, that is the meaningful teaching and learning for the sole purpose of teaching and learning, and say nothing else, where the focus is on adopting a humane approach of care and empathy on the equalizing power relationship in the learning through equity and justice. And although emergency education is not a new concept and emergency situations are not limited to pandemic, however, this COVID-19 was unique in terms of its global scale of implications, and it disrupted our learning ecologies and exacerbated the pre-existing inequalities, leading to trauma, anxiety, stress, and therefore justifies the need for human-centered pedagogical designs. Therefore, there is an urgent need for inclusive designs to remove the contextual barriers and further stress the importance of creating the environment where the learners are listened to, cared for, and means because especially they may feel vulnerable during these difficult times. So we need to pay attention to the importance of empathetic communication with them. And as very popularly famously indicated by Moore and Kirsley, there the spatial and temporal distances, they have always been an issue, means in say online distance education. So to mitigate the problems associated with these issues and to support the distance education modes, like the hybrid or blended learning, the technologies, they have been widely adopted in the educational landscape. Although most efforts have been aimed at using technology to reduce the spatial or temporal distance, the transactional distance, referring to psychological and communicational distance, is actually more important than this so-called spatial or temporal distance. And there should be efforts to reduce it. Finally, the affective proximity for that, because from the perspective of care-oriented, human-centered pandemic pedagogy, our efforts should focus on affective aspects of teaching and learning. And therefore, in the ecologies of learning and affective proximity is equal as important as transactional distance from there. And thus, we can argue that the old normal is problematic because it perceives learners as objects rather than subjects. And if we wish to raise individuals who will change and transform the world, then it is imperative that the learners are seen as subjects in order to facilitate their intellectual liberty and growth. And now, more than ever, we need critical minds that question the world around us, as is happening in COP26 in Glasgow. But most of these educational systems see learners as passive receivers and use education to shape their minds, not to liberate them. So therefore, we need to keep asking open-ended questions and seek open-ended responses. And finally, ultimately, we all invite you to consider sharing your work, sharing your ideas to Asian Journal of Distance Education. This is our team, our founding members, and the current team working for it. So thank you so much for listening. I'm stopping my screen now so that Dr. Aras can take over now. Over to you, Aras.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. It was a thought-provoking presentation. I hope my presentation will be a complementary presentation in addition to your thoughts. Let me share my screen. Well, I guess you see my screen now.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and hello, world. Whatever your time zone is, you can pick up a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or good night. And I also want to say merhaba in my mother tongue, which means hello in Turkish. I am Aras Bozkurt, an associate professor of distance education at Anadolu University, Turkey. I am really happy to be with you and share some of my thoughts on COVID-19 teaching, learning, and education. Actually, the following slides will provide reflections from the editorials, which provided some major themes, and you can see these publications on the slide. What Jim Wallis says perfectly illustrates what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. He says, sometimes it takes a natural disaster to reveal a social disaster. In our case, a butterfly flapping its wings was enough to reveal the global social disaster. At the end of the day, the lesson learned was so simple. With online, offline, and on-site connections, the world is a global village, and a butterfly flapping its wings in Asia can cause a hurricane all around the globe. Currently, it seems that the global education system is in the middle of this hurricane. The COVID butterfly flapped its wings and a compulsory shift in our paradigms has occurred. The COVID-19 pandemic was unexpected, unpredicted, and hit the entire globe. Nations suddenly entered a race for survival, which indicates that we need to reset what we know, learn unlearning, and then learn relearning. In fact, today we are living in a strange new world where to be social means to keep distance, and weirdly, to be labeled positive has negative meanings. These developments suggest that we are on the brink of a new future, where time would be understood in terms of BC and AC to indicate before and after COVID-19. In fact, we are going through a global reset of many things, including education. The COVID-19 pandemic has been more than a crisis. Maybe it has been a global wake-up call to change our paradigms and the way we perceive the world. Not surprisingly, the pandemic has altered the way we interpret the normal as well as the way we live. The interruption of education and the derivations of normal suggest that we are experiencing an extraordinary time, one marked by major shifts in the way we understand and interpret different areas of life. Accordingly, new implies evolving rather than contrasting or even intending to replace the old. We can argue that after the COVID-19 times, we need to focus on the future to avoid the temptation to go back to the normal, as most of the problems reside in the past or in the normal we once knew. In this transition process, our minds can trick and deceive us into going back to the normal by perceiving the past as a comfort zone and the future as a challenge with full of unknowns and uncertainty. However, To see things this way would be an illusion, considering that there has been many mistakes in the normal. The previously known normal no longer exists, and the new normal is real and here to stay, and therefore we need to reconstruct our future on solid grounds by accepting the reality of the new normal. In education, new normal means revisiting how we define the art of teaching and learning, and it requires an inquiry on educational pedagogies, theories, practices, and technologies. And I think it is time to revisit what we know about the traditional educational systems and our assumptions. Accordingly, as an outcome of the measures taken worldwide to slow down the pandemic, more than 1.6 billion enrolled students of all ages from all around the globe experienced interruption of education, which equals nearly 90% of the global student population. As a result of this interruption, emergency remote education is put into practice. The educational practices during the COVID-19 pandemic are denoted with different terms in different countries. However, actually these terms do not quite capture what is being practiced during the interruption of education, and thus these practices can be better described as emergency remote education. The remarkable difference between emergency remote education and distance education, as we know, is that the latter is an option while the former is an obligation. Such an understanding is crucial because misconceptions in definitions would lead us to misconceptions in practices. While the emergency remote education provided temporal solutions, it also led to educational sins. In pivoting to online emergency remote education, as seen in the failure of copying traditional face-to-face education and pasting it to online education, the same simple mechanism of copying and pasting cannot be applied. Imitating a process meant for something else has resulted in unsuccessful and ineffective learning experiences. To heal this situation, the benefits and positive features of distance education need to be explained, advocated, and promoted, and I believe the audience of this webinar will be very helpful for this purpose. In short, distance learning's blind imitation of face-to-face instruction has been the chief educational sin, one which will have both short-term and long-term consequences in the post-COVID world. The COVID-19 pandemic has generated a great degree of uncertainty regarding the future of globalization, especially as it relates to the education. Deglobalization measures were already on the rise when COVID-19 struck the world, but it reached its peak in the response of many countries to close their borders to slow down the spread of the pandemic. The global village has been transformed into global online village, where online infrastructures, communications, and interactions have a significant role. Many universities have already adopted digital transformation strategies as a way to be resilient in the digital knowledge age. And this trend has now accelerated on account of the COVID-19 pandemic. As such, digital ecosystems have emerged. In creating a digital presence, a digital twin needs to be birthed. In other words, physical campuses are reproducing digital versions of themselves. However, the great onlining and online learning ecologies will also bring many future challenges. For instance, how will we regulate these spaces? How will learners form their digital identities? How will we ensure equity and justice? How will we react to events of racial, religious, ethnic, social, and economic discrimination? And how will we ensure and enable efficient, effective, and sustainable teaching and learning process? In short, in addition to opportunities offered by digital twins in the digital ecosystems, there will be many challenges that we must be proactive in addressing and managing. Though the fatigue is largely related to our physical or mental performance, more recently, it has been linked to the digital tools and or spaces we use during the online education. However, the recipe to prevent digital burnout and fatigue is relatively simple. Apply the best theories and practices of online distance education and design actual learning processes rather than processes with techno-fetish designs. And more importantly, I think we must give up copying and pasting face-to-face education to online distance education. There are many other issues that we need to consider. One of these issues is surveillance, ethics, and data privacy. In a panoptical society, the data that is collected through surveillance is the new oil. Beyond issues of mining digital footprints, violations of privacy, and mass surveillance, the real concern is the imposition of these features of the panoptic society will lead to our acceptance and normalization of them. It may be certainly easy to accept that the year 2020 was awful, but the year 2021 will be better, and 2022 will be a much better and happier year. I hope that, yes, we are still in 2021, but we must ask ourselves, are we really living in 2021, or are we on the verge of descending into George Orwell's 1984, a time which depicts a dystopian world where mass surveillance was the normal? The digital divide, which refers to the gap between those who have and do not have access to computers and the internet, is a term that has evolved over time and emerged in new forms. While the idea of human divide is not limited to digital world, and actually it never was, currently it is digital divide that has been threatening the entire globe. And while we are already well aware of the cultural, religious, ethnic, and economic divides that separate humanity from an educational perspective, we are now witnessing that the digital divide is far greater than we imagined, as it is responsible for inequalities and injustices. In this sense, it is critical to answer the following questions. How should we respond as a global society? Should we continue to let the gap widen, or should we act now before the gap grows out of control? During the COVID-19 pandemic, the entire educational landscape has needed educational resources capable of being shared among and within educational networks to sustain the educational processes. In this regard, open educational resources and open educational practices have played a significant role in ensuring the sustainability of education. However, during these times, we also learned that we need to inquire who has ownership of knowledge and why is sharing as a practice important. Let's explore these notions by looking at the life of nomads. Nomads, for instance, do not settle down, but rather wander around to find resources and to survive. Such a way of life made sharing as a vital skill for nomads. They shared their tools, experiences, stories, and most importantly, they shared knowledge to collectively survive. And in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been forced to revisit our early traditions, follow our instincts, share and collaborate to survive, just like the nomads had to do. We have instinctively and sometimes unwittingly and unintentionally shared in order to survive in these wild times. The crisis also taught us emerging roles of the parents and the invisible roles of the schools and universities. In the absence of the teachers and schools during emergency remote education, many parents took the educational roles to supervise or to support the students, and most importantly, to ensure the continuity of the education. Many country cases report that schools and universities, in fact, were sheltering many students, and these buildings were the places where a considerable number of students were getting their basic needs. In these traumatic times, psychological pressure and anxiety were prevalent among students, teachers, and families. Among many, the uncertainty and fear were the main reasons. Whether in K-12 or higher education, pedagogy of care is needed in these traumatic times because care is one of the basic needs, and when we navigate on unknown territories, experience new approaches, and stick to our lives during the lockdown days, we need care more than anything. Given the effects that traumatic events can have on learners' well-being, we must be sure to create a warm climate and a welcoming space where we can listen, understand, respect, help, love, and embrace them. Trauma-informed care and empathy-oriented pandemic pedagogy should focus on achieving effective and emotional outcomes rather than on pedagogical outcomes. Pandemic pedagogy provides the opportunity to apply different approaches, and it also reminds us we need pedagogical minimalism. In pedagogical minimalism, the core idea is putting humans and their learning needs to the center of all educational processes and leaving being techno-fetish. During the first waves of pandemic, collaboration and sharing among the individuals and institutions were the first reflex in many countries. And these countries were able to soften the first wave of the COVID-19 crisis. Support communities and mechanisms were effective, and their scope included emotional and pedagogical support. The inequalities were not new, but they were clearly visible through the lens of the COVID-19. In fact, what the pandemic is doing is augmenting of deeply rooted pre-existing inequalities, and shamefully, we ignored most of these inequalities thus far. The COVID-19 pandemic has uncovered many facts that have been ignored for a long while. As we started wearing masks, the real features and characteristics of higher education have been unmasked. And now we can see higher education with no clothes. And if higher education is naked, with nothing to cover its faults, we can and we should scream out, the emperor has no clothes. That's one of our primary objectives now, to reshape the higher education and to say that higher education has no clothes. We also learned by experience that the soft skills and digital competencies were necessary for the implementation of the emergency remote education. Unless we can use these tools effectively, investing in hard technologies such as computers and internet, this will not contribute to creating success stories. However, soft technologies such as theories and approaches are equally important, and we need the right mix, a harmony between these technologies. Following the new normal, there will be a tendency to adopt blended or hybrid modes of education. This comes from the idea of blending the strengths of one type of mode and neutralizing the weakness of the others. This means that we will be able to provide more flexibility, openness, and more importantly, different entry points for those who seek for knowledge. On the other hand, as educators and educational institutions, how well we are prepared for hybrid and blended learning. To conclude, it is high time for higher education to renew, recalibrate, and reposition itself in the educational landscape. This would require the institution of higher education to regenerate itself and be born again, like the phoenix. It needs to rise from the ashes, but to do this, it must first face the flames. In this context, what should educators do? How can they create an ideal learning ecosystem? Denon offers a good starting point by proposing that our educational understanding should be shaped by the following priorities. People should be first, content should be second, and technology should be third. In the end, technology and education are meant to be for the people, and such an approach should always be our mantra as educators. We have to center our arguments on the human, not the technology or the content. Similarly, Chow reminds us that teaching and learning are primarily about human beings, for human beings, and by human beings. And I think this is one of the critical notions that we have to remember, especially during these hard and tough times. In line with these thoughts, it is also argued that what we teach in these times can have secondary importance. We have to keep in mind that students will remember not the educational content, but how they felt during these hard times. With an empathetic approach, the story will not center on how successfully deliver the educational content, but it will be on how learners narrate these times. This presentation as a part of this webinar provided an outlook to the pandemic and its educational consequences, and depicted how we survived to keep teaching and learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. But the question is never what we did in COVID-19 pandemic, but what we will do for upcoming interruptions. Will we learn from our mistakes, or will we repeat our mistakes? As a final reminder, I would like to note that in the educational kingdom, context is the king, content is the queen, quality is the crown, and care and empathy are the kingdom itself. This kingdom is built upon and ruled by founding principles, equity and justice, and is committed to inclusivity, diversity, and accessibility. The inhabitants of this kingdom are in seek for meaning, knowledge, and wisdom to realize themselves, transform their environments, and make the learning ecology a better place, not only for themselves, but for everyone and everything. By its definition, an alchemist transforms or creates something through a magical process. In his magnum opus work, The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho narrates that when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. Inspired by these words and the way alchemists are defined, it is our hope that educators will take the role of the alchemist and develop, refine, purify, and perfect the educational system to achieve a learning ecosystem that works for everyone. As educational alchemists, we should dream of a better future, fight for it, work for it, to ensure that education evolves into its true and ideal form. Thank you for being here and listening to me. I hope you are not bored during the presentation. If you have any questions, you can use the chat box.
Thank you, Aras, for this wonderful presentation. And okay, friends, thank you for your support and listening to the presentation. If there are any questions, then you are most welcome. And Aras, I'm making you the host now because after 10 minutes, I may have to switch over to the other event. In that case, you can close it if it extends.
Dr. Ramesh, I guess we don't have any question. Probably we made a clear and to the point presentation. Maybe we can stop recording and complete the webinar. Özlem, okay. I think Özlem will tell something.
Let me see the chat box.
Yeah, hi everyone. I don't have a question, but I would like to thank you, Dr. Sharma and Dr. Bosgord, for pointing out very important keywords. And I try to take some notes when I'm listening to. And now I'm looking at my notes and I see that all of the titles or keywords sounds like individual topics that we need to explore, dig in, and maybe research more on and publish. So I just wanted to thank you for pointing out and picking all these important keywords, especially today's world in education. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Aljen.
Thank you, Özlem.
Okay, friends, then thank you so much. Okay, Aras.
Okay,
Alev has a question, please.
Yeah, I can take the lead.
Yeah.
Actually, the future is about blending the learning in higher education, because thus far we always ignored the power of the blended learning. But now COVID-19 is forcing us to change. But like countries, Turkey, actually, we always go back to the normal. I mean, for example, in Turkey, in K-12 and higher education, decision makers are insisting on practicing face-to-face education. And I think Dr. Ramesh mentioned in his presentation, face-to-face education is not the gold standard. Actually, it is also not true to compare blended learning, face-to-face education, and online distance education. As long as you design these processes good and well, they will all work. I think the problem, do we really need face-to-face education in the whole educational ecosystem, or should we shift to online distance education or blended learning in the whole educational ecosystem? My perception is that the future is not trying to select one of these sides. I mean, rather than black and white, now we realize that there are different shades of the gray. So these shades will be visible with the blended learning.
Okay, Ras, a quick reply, please. Ellen is asking that what would you recommend on how to go about?
By the way, I see a comment from Elani Kuho. I hope my presentation is right. Okay. Actually, rather than design process, I just want to ask you another question. I mean, I will answer your question with another question. Yes, we are talking about putting the humans, learners, to the center of learning process. But whatever the learning process is outlined, maybe it is really well structured. I think we always care the empathic approaches. Just go back to the future. Remember your K-12 or higher education processes and think about the teacher you remember now. Probably it was he or she was not the best teacher that taught you a subject, but who demonstrated some empathetic approaches. So what we mean about pedagogy of care and empathy is putting these effective dimensions of learning to the front of the educational process, not the content. Or as Dana reminded us, it is not technology or the content, but humans always at the forefront of all educational process. Rob, okay, thank you. Oh, Som is also here. He is the editor of Distance Education. We are very honored to see you here.
Ras, I have made you the host. So
okay.
After this, would you like to close it? Because I got a call from my next event.
All right. Yeah.
And friends, thank you so much for your support to this session. And take care and see you again very soon, all of you.
Thank you.
Ras, you can continue,
all
and
right,
once
yeah.
it is there, you can stop the recording also.
Okay, all right. I just want to make a brief comment to Som Naidu's message. Yes, you are truly right. The future is about mixing and matching, and like the discussion of global north and global south, or being on the right or left political side. I think even in the educational process, we have to stop creating different polars that widen the gaps, that puts us categories. This is for the practice and also for the pedagogy. And if I comes to the earlier question by Alev Ateş Çobanoğlu, it is right time to explore the beauty of the shades. I think that's all. If there is any question, I can take them. If not, I will stop recording and leave the webinar. I think that's all for now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again. There are other webinars you can check from the ODLAS webpage or ODLAS Twitter handle. I suggest you to register these events, and there will be another webinar by Som Naudi and Christina. Thank you. She just shared the link. See you around. See you somewhere online.